Okay, welcome everybody. Wonderful to see you all here. Whoops, I'm punching my cord. There's always a technical problem, and hopefully that was the only one that we'll have today. Today we are excited. We have Professor Steve Bien-Aimé, Dr. Bien-Aimé. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I've been calling you Ami because it looks like a me forever, and nobody's corrected me, but I usually do it in text. And I always take the time to like hold down the E key on my Mac and get the accent mark over the E. So I do that much. I'm always better
Flash.
in, yeah, I'm always better in writing than I am in speaking. So, um, so I apologize. Starting out, I ran down to get a handkerchief because I'm upstairs. It gets really hot here in the upstairs office. I've actually created a second office in the basement, but then there's just basement junk behind me. Um, Steve, we're kind of neighbors. Like, so you're at University of Northern Kentucky. So you're sort of, are you in Cincinnati itself, or whereabouts do you make your
I'm
home?
15 minutes north of. I live 15 minutes north of Cincinnati,
Oh, you
and
live
the
north of
school
Cincinnati.
is
Mhm.
10 minutes south of Cincinnati, 10 miles south of Cincinnati. So it's very interesting.
Yes, yeah, that is because that bottleneck where the highways come together over the river, the Ohio River is can be miserable. So uh, our theme was written by a graduate of the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati because I said, if we're going to do a theme, we have to have somebody from a conservatory do the music. And my wife said, well, how about our son? Because, so Uh, so
Very cool.
Steve, as I said, he's at the University of Northern Kentucky. I love this. I keep retyping the intro in various forms, introducing you online. I loved what I just found you did a talk with the the San Diego Penn Professional Editors Network a couple of weeks ago, and they started out saying that Professor Steve Bien-Aimé helps editors and writers gain a better understanding of how written communication can erase or marginalize certain groups and how to detect bias in language, which is perfect for copy editors. We have many copy editors in this group. But your research area has been race and gender in the media, and you have a sports background. And so when we talked originally weeks ago, um, there, honestly, there weren't that many things. There have been so many things that have come up that I thought, oh, perfect timing. Why don't we
Yeah,
start
it's
with,
been busy.
yeah, well, you've been busy too, right? Have you been in demand?
Yeah, this has been a very opportune time for those who are uh, involved or enthusiasts in inclusive language. And I see Karen Yin in the group. So shout out to Karen and Conscious Style Guide. I see Henry Furman, my advisory board member there. And a lot of groups have been in journalism and in even I think in talks. I think I'm going to get it wrong, but I think a social work group is interested in potentially talking about inclusive language.
Mhm.
So this is a really good moment, and for those people who, well, thank you all for coming. We were discussing before the show began how this is a moment to reconceive how we do things. And this movement toward inclusive language, I think it's just great to see people wanting to make big changes, little changes, but changes that are positive in either way.
Right. It's an opportunity for inclusive language and also inclusion in general, which, we both have a newspaper background. And I mean, I know that for years, I mean, when I started, in the 80s, and I know it was been going on long before that, there was a real movement to find minority journalists. And on a copy desk, I mean, if you had a person of color who could do the job in a copy desk, you were just, you're ecstatic to find that because it's been very difficult. And I don't know, I've seen the effort made, but then, and which sort of I think fell off some during the Great Recession and newspaper cutbacks probably, but but it never seemed to result in real change. And is this an opportunity now that, I mean, are you optimistic that with what's been going on, we'll see some change?
I'm optimistic in that the people who have been contacting me and contacting different groups are senior folks, because to do the work that we need to do, to be inclusive, to be thoughtful, to be mindful, you need buy-in from management, because this isn't a 5-minute job. This
Mhm.
requires an investment of time, an investment of money, an investment in reconceiving how we think of an organization. So if the people up top are seeing it's important that we get diverse voices, so people who can speak to um, different states of ability,
Mhm.
people who come from different regions, people who come from different sexual orientations, people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. That takes time to cultivate that network. That takes time to also change your culture in your workplace to make sure when you bring in folks who are, let's say, not the norm in your workplace,
Mhm.
that they feel welcome, that they want to stay. Because what can often happen is you bring in folks who add to your tapestry of diversity, but then they don't feel welcome, they don't feel valued, and then they're not going to stay. And we see that in retention numbers with women in journalism. We see
Mhm.
that with retention numbers with people of color, quite frankly, in my field in academia now. So this is going to
Mhm.
require a big investment, but I'm heartened to see that this is being taken on by a lot of senior folks.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so what, so it's an interesting point about making someone feel welcome is what can, and I'm a freelancer now, so I don't interact directly with people in a workplace, but how do you make somebody feel welcome, say in a newsroom or in an office where, where you're, uh, uh, the editorial department of a company, for instance?
This is a great question, and we tackled this at was that ACES 2019, and it was at Rhode Island.
Yeah. Hmm. Providence,
Yeah,
right?
we had a great session there. We had like Ted Kim from the New York Times, Elena, I forget her last name, but it was at BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
A lot of these, um, a lot of the ways you make people feel welcome is, am I treating the person as a member of the team, a full member? So when we're talking about style changes, we're not only going to someone because of a particular identity,
Hmm.
right? It's, are we valuing them for all their talents? Because we trained, we worked, we have our credentials, and people are more than one singular characteristic, trait, identity. They are holistic. We carry multiple identities, so we have to value folks for all of that. And I think we have to encourage a workspace where if there is something that someone does that hurts someone, offends someone, makes someone feel less than, that they feel there's a productive space to do that. I'm thankful for a lot of the colleagues who have pulled me aside throughout my career to say, Steve, that's not going to cut it. That's you're better than that.
Huh.
And you have to be humble enough to take that kind of critique, learn from it, and move forward. And I think that's the biggest part with inclusion No one is 100% inclusive, no one is perfect, but you're working each day to be better, and you want to present yourself and present your organization or culture in such a way that if someone brings that to your attention, that they will be heard, they will be respected, and we can move forward as an organization, as teammates, to make sure we all feel 100% invested and valued in the company.
Hmm. Okay, great. There's just one quote out of you. I've seen you writing a lot too lately. Uh, Things have been busy. You did a column for Adweek that you shared with me, and just one quote out of many that wasn't the cusp of the article, but you said uh, the issue of diversity in media in general, you said perhaps made more timely as corporate America seeks to show support for anti-racist policies. Is this an opportunity to actually see some progress? Which is essentially my question. But um, I'm sorry. Then you said essentially leaders were willfully ignorant and marginalized. Let me start over. Essentially, leaders were willfully ignorant of marginalized people suffering because ignoring the suffering allowed the leaders to run their companies in a manner that made the current power structure comfortable. Um, there is this sense, or maybe a little bit of backlash, maybe some of it's fair, maybe some of it's unfair, that it's convenient given the time to issue statements that say, we hear you, we were wrong, we could have done better, we believe in diversity, we believe in the suffering of people of color, black people in particular. Um, but that's we're at an uncomfortable place. So 6 months from now, a year from now, is that comfort going to sort of reassert itself?
I think there's a high likelihood for that. I think what has also been happening is a parallel movement where those who have felt marginalized, to quote my students' term, are spilling the tea. And they are articulating in very forceful ways the way they feel their organizations are not listening to them, promoting them, valuing them. I think often there is not a mystery when you see the a power structure exists for 25, 30, 40, 50, 100, 500 years, and you don't see much variance, much change.
Yeah.
And I think where companies need to understand is the discomfort that some people, perhaps at the top of the organizational chain, feel. Their employees, or especially the employees who have felt marginalized the most, they feel that discomfort every day. That's not a 1 month discomfort or a 6 month discomfort. That's every day. And it doesn't hurt someone who has privilege, who has power to be more inclusive. You don't lose anything by that. You strengthen yourself, you strengthen your team because you're bringing in the best ideas, you're bringing in the best talent. Um, all the research shows that the more diverse your team is, experiences, just across the board, you're going to just be way stronger because you're going to be able to speak to more people and be able to think in ways that are, for lack of a better term, unconventional to the current power structure, but that might be more inclusive and widen the base
Mm-hmm.
because you're touching more people and respecting more people's experiences and identities and lives.
Right. Right. Excellent. Thank you for wonderful answers there. Um, the the place I was going to start is, and I think maybe it ties into this idea of uh, what we've seen is from corporations, it sort of pays them to um, to show that they're interested in diversity. What's in their heart, we can only, we can only assume what's in the front office, but um, but certainly money plays a role in not wanting to be on the wrong side of social change and current events and people's feelings. And I think maybe that plays into account in the Washington football team, which suddenly has decided maybe we should change our nickname.
Yeah, I can remember, I think it was in the late 80s. I remember it was the Super Bowl in Minneapolis in the Metrodome, and indigenous people were protesting then, and I was a small kid,
Hmm.
and I remember that. But folks in power say, I never heard anything. I never heard anything.
Hmm.
Well, did you not hear anything because you didn't want to listen? Or did you not hear anything because you weren't put in different spaces? Not to kick the Washington Post, but when that survey came out that X number of indigenous people aren't bothered by the name, I don't know if we've done studies that say, well, X number of women feel this way about term X, therefore we will eliminate term X, or
Right, right.
Black people feel that way about term Y. So I didn't know there has to be this kind of quantitative critical mass.
Hmm.
Like that construction was odd to me. And methodologically, the Native American Journalists Association, the group has a great piece on the methodological issues with that. But once we start getting into, there has to be a quantitative um, point where we do care about people or people's feelings. That's a real
Hmm.
that's taken us in a direction where how do you reach a critical mass? I'm working on a new column for Conscious Style Guide. A little late on it, so I'm hoping to finish up this week.
We can cut this
Um,
short. Karen's on the in the audience if you want to.
uh, but I'm working on a piece about our language with COVID-19 and um, older adults. So I was talking to a colleague of mine who is a top professor in social work gerontology. I didn't even know they don't use the term elderly anymore. It's older
Right.
adults because of the framing issues there. But there is a very I hate the word problematic. There is a framing that is done about COVID where a lot of times there's a devaluing of folks who have who are immunocompromised or of older adults that their lives or their experiences don't value as much, right? And so I'm working on this piece, and it speaks to, well, older adults make up a high percentage of the US population. Now, if they don't matter, as in, I don't know, I'm still doing the research, but let's say
Yeah.
it's 20%. Well, that's a pretty significant amount of people. We're saying, well, we're gonna sacrifice 20 for 80, and those are false binaries. First of all,
Right.
but how did you get there? Why? Well, why don't we sacrifice this 15% for this 85? Once you get into those discussions of we're devaluing one person, we've gone in the wrong direction. We should be
Yeah.
uplifting everyone, protecting everyone, making sure everyone feels valued and has dignity. And that's why I support groups like Conscious Style Guide and a lot of the affinity journalism groups, because we're trying to improve our discourse, because I only have one experience as well, but at the same time, make sure that every person feels as though that then when they read a fiction book, when they read nonfiction journalism or other things, history textbooks, that their experiences are valued, that we have thought of them as we're producing this content.
Mm-hmm. I suppose corollary to that, you could say that to take the argument to another level, where and people have taken it. It's not just me making this up, but people will say people of color make up 25% of the population, so why should the 75% have to worry about that? The majority of us think it's fine how things are going, so we'll just keep going. So, and obviously that's a an uncomfortable thing to say, something that very few people would agree with. Very, very few people would agree with. But that's sort of the same thing, like saying, well, uh, only a few Native Americans are bothered, or or less than half of Native Americans are bothered by team names. Um, so I looked this up. My high school is still the Chieftains. Um, and I grew up in Michigan, and there's, we have lots of uh, Indian names throughout, still in use, um, county names and cities and rivers and things like that. My college is the Chippewas, which interestingly uh, after I attended Central Michigan University, there's a very large native population there, and the Saginaw Band of Chippewa Indians um, has a big presence in Central Michigan. Um, and Central, I think, at least did the right thing by saying, how can we preserve this name that we've had for decades, but still do it in a way that honors rather than degrades. And they made some changes in imagery and things. Um, but then it still seems like you're you're making you're making a group of people your mascot. You don't. I had an email the other day. I have no idea why, from uh, uh, Florida State University. And it was from the Seminoles, saying Seminoles, never defeated. And I thought, why is an Indian tribe sending me this email? And I opened it up. It was Florida State alumni, something. I've never had any affiliation with them. Um, but I think why does that school feel? I mean, the Seminoles were in southern Florida. They're in the Panhandle. There's no real connection there. Yet there's there's still this thing, and the excuse is, well, we're honoring, but I'm just rambling on about this. But what about that? Is there is it time to retire all uh, these names?
And I think that's a discussion that is going to be ongoing. I believe with Florida State, there's an economic arrangement with the tribe, um, where there's some money that they receive for I think the licensing of the name or
Yeah.
using the name.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things where, and I think it came up in a pointer piece, and perhaps we'll talk about that later. Language evolves and norms evolve, and so perhaps it could be that the group leaders might say, "Well, we're paid, but you know what? We're tired of this arrangement. We don't want you to use the name anymore." It's unclear. I think it's good to be contextual, where each circumstance has its own um, uh, each circumstance just has its own factors that go into it. So I don't necessarily think it's a blanket policy, depending on what um, different schools or different teams and the relationships they might have with different indigenous groups. But I think it's something where this is most likely not the best thing to do in a lot of groups who are impacted by this. And there's research that talks about the psychological impact of these names that have been injurious to indigenous youth,
Mm-hmm.
that it's probably a good thing to change these names or bring. And I think another thing that's important is when these discussions are taking place, that you don't bring in just a token member of a group to say, well, we brought in one person to to inform our opinion, and there's like six of the people who are not in that group, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one is outnumbered by six. It's
Mm-hmm.
not saying maybe it's 50-50, but
Right.
how much input did the person who's trying to inform your team or inform your organization, how much input did they really have if they are one of six or one of 10 or one of 20? And so this comes up a lot in literature research on tokenism. You need to make sure that if you're going to have a diverse range of folks, that they feel as though they have the power to help make change and not just be there, but then be steamrolled.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about along those lines. Let's talk about a pet peeve of mine, um, and that is we'll get away from race and into gender for a bit. Uh, Names of teams that use that are derivatives of the male name for the female part of the team. Um, which and so I looked this up. Of course, there's a Wikipedia page for everything, and I was interested to see how many colleges have gotten away from the lady, you know, blank, the lady Wildcats. We still have the lady Volunteers. Um, and is this true in Kentucky, the Kentucky State Thoroughbreds? Have you heard
Oh, I'll have to look at
that?
that.
I, this is on
I,
Wikipedia. Maybe it's instead of
th-
thoroughbreds for the men.
this is really interesting. And this is again where having a range of experiences is very helpful. So I went to school up north. I grew up just outside Philadelphia in South Jersey, and then went to Penn State. So these discussions are framed where, yeah, it should be the same, same teams, right? Men's team, women's team, or boys team, girls team. When I went south, when I taught at LSU, gender identity is seemingly, they didn't seem, a lot of women didn't see a problem with it and felt it was um, affirming their gender identity. And it was,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes something where, okay, I, as a cisgender uh, man, I'm stepping out because I'm not. I can see arguments for both ways, but I think
Mm-hmm.
this is something where region and different norms come in, because what ideology is being conferred when we say lady vols or lady tigers, and what, who's left in and who's left out, um, what is meant when I look at this, and my bigger issue comes in with what we would call asymmetrical gender marking, right? So we have the NBA and the WNBA. Well, it should be just men's basketball, women's basketball,
Yeah.
right? Why do we have to have a gender identifier there? So to me, like, that's pretty obvious that, like, well, if the men don't have to identify, the women don't. But maybe that could be the solution, where it's the men's vols and the lady vols. Like, this is where there's a lot of nuance to these discussions, and a lot of cultural and regional norms that are perhaps somewhat limiting, but are ingrained, but who's in the spaces to have these discussions. But definitely when I see things like the WNBA versus the NBA, that sets off my spidey sense, so to speak,
Yeah.
because what are we saying here?
Mm-hmm. So, so what are we seeing a trend? You know, the lawsuit by the women's U.S. soccer team, um, the which I don't know if that's still going on, or if I think they suffered a setback or a defeat, and maybe it was a Pyrrhic victory for the league, because it certainly raised awareness and of some of the differences in how the two teams are paid. But are we seeing progress in that area, gender equity in sports?
It's interest. It's interesting. At one level, you could say yes. In well, a couple of levels. The numbers for the NWSL, right, the National Women's Soccer League,
Mhm.
right? Again, with this gender identifier, but producing ratings are up, right, and
Right.
showing if you put women's sports on TV, people will watch. But I think what's also happening is some of the disinvestment in women's sports are also manifesting itself now during this COVID pandemic, where TV stations are not, they're doing remote broadcasts. Well, they would do that for a lot of women's games because you didn't want to pay freelancers, you didn't want to fly
Mm.
your staffs out there. So if you're treating them the same, now we're seeing, well, this is now becoming a little bit more of an equal playing field in that way. I think what's necessary if you're going to look at athletics is how we talk about that. And I think if we're bringing this into the wordsmithing realm, are we talking about athleticism? Are we talking about quote unquote adherence to gender norms, where perhaps we downplay a woman's athletic dominance but talk about her personal life? Or are we talking about, and there's some examples where I think there's one from the 2016 Olympics where somebody was the wife of a Chicago Bears player, and
Yeah.
this person won a medal, and it was like, no, the person has a name. But how we talk about folks and how we describe them and how we describe their accomplishments, that plays into it.
Mm.
And one of the things that I like to talk about when I discuss sports or teach sports, journalism, sports writing, I used to cover and edit boxing and mixed martial arts.
Mm.
So we would never say 140, when Manny Pacquiao was a top boxer, men's boxer, right? And at 150 pounds, it would be ridiculous to say he would be the top heavyweight, right? But they would say pound for pound champion. But magically, we create these gender differences. Well, this person is quote unquote good for a woman. Well, if you're saying pound for pound, this person is great, right? Serena Williams,
Mm.
the GOAT, right? Greatest of all time. You don't have to say, well, the greatest of all time for women, but or Rafa Nadal is the greatest of all time, but or this. I hear this argument. Well, if she played a man, she would lose. Well, if you don't say that in mixed martial arts, you wouldn't say that in boxing. Why are you devaluing somebody when that's not the discussion here? We're
Mm.
talking about excellence. We're talking about dominance. We're talking about the brilliance of the competitor. And these are things where unconscious biases come forward and other stuff. So this is where we as editors can really help steer that conversation, where we don't have a lot of say in advertising dollars. We don't have a lot of say in how much production money is being spent, but we do have a lot of say in, okay, are we making sure that we're respecting and valuing the athlete's brilliance on the field or in the ring or on the court as we would if the athlete were a man.
Yeah, yeah. And I always, I mean, I when I explain what an editor does, to people who assume I just change commas, which is 80% of my job, granted, but um, it's interpreting, it's making sure you are saying what you think you're saying, and a writer can be maybe forgiven for in the on deadline um, not thinking about sort of thinking in terms of the norm or what they know. So a white male writer may put some show some biases in the article, but an editor can be the one to say, okay, let's take the broader view. Your audience is not is not all men. Um, your audience is not people who just watch men's sports.
This comes back to my earlier point about what resources we're devoting here. When we don't respect the value of copy editors, when we don't respect the value of time, when we don't respect the value of thoroughness, then these depictions are going to become more common. And yeah. When I write a piece for Conscious Style Guide, I'm thankful that sometimes it takes 2 weeks, the back and forth with Karen, to really hammer through concepts. And I really respect that part of it. And also because, I have a copy editing background, so I respect the editing process. Mm-hmm. But there was a tweet out today that I appreciated. I liked it, what said, well, we don't expect people to learn coding and all these things in 1 hour training, but we expect people to be culturally competent in a 1 hour diversity training. And to extend that further, you can't expect someone to be a great to thoroughly edit a piece if you gave them 5 minutes and say, well, put it on Twitter. Well, okay, is there a material difference between putting up the column on Twitter an hour after the game or an hour and 15 minutes after the game? If that extra 15 minutes helps you, because now you see, again, people will come back and are much more vocal now in saying, hey, what did you do here? What this is not right, what you said. I would rather have taken 15 minutes and have someone focus on the brilliance of my column than on my error, which comes in from, again, my most likely lack of time, but also my limited range of experiences. Mm-hmm. And that comes back to having a diverse editing team. That comes back to a lot of things. So I'm hoping that also when as we're seeing people or seeing organizations talk about their commitment to inclusion, that they have a commitment to inclusion on so many levels. If for those who get a chance, Volkswagen had a commercial, you can Google it, where I believe it was a black person was sitting next to a Volkswagen, and then they like CGI a hand, but the hand is white, like sweeping the person away. And then it comes back, and then there's like a white person like getting in this Volkswagen. And they didn't know that this commercial was, and they did their investigation. It was like, oh, we don't really have a diverse team, so no one saw that this potentially had an issue. So I could reasonably see that because again, if you don't have a lot of range of experiences. But perhaps that should have been workshopped to another group. Maybe they should have taken 1 more week or expand that range, and that then you could have, because your people are talking about the commercial, they're not talking about the car, right? And that's where I think the discussion on editing and the discussion on inclusion comes in, because people are talking about, I'm hurt, that hurts me, and I'm not buying a car, or I'm not thinking about your car. I'm thinking about how I'm hurt. I'm not thinking about the brilliance of your prose. thinking about how your prose did not reflect my experience or marginalize me.
Right.
So I think that it's just that important that we, if we're going to be serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we're putting commitments into people, money, training, and time.
Mhm. Okay. I have a couple of other heavy topics to talk about. It's just, we're going to solve a lot of problems today. But if anybody has any questions, uh, just ask them in the group chat, and I'll be happy to shut up for a minute and let somebody else ask Steve a question. You mentioned boxing, and I noted on your faculty page, you said there's interesting fact. I was thrown out of a boxing gym by a former world champion. So what's the story there?
Yeah, that was so I had never been to a boxing gym. I had followed boxing since I was a kid. But there was like a media event at I think it was Manny Pacquiao versus Ricky Hatton. So I'd never been to a boxing gym, but my training says, okay, if you've never been somewhere, you have to go early
Yeah.
to make sure that you can kind of capture this experience and get up to speed. Because you show up on time, you're behind, because not only are you trying to figure out what's going on, the event is actually occurring. So you can't do two things at once. So and then not knowing that much, I kind of dress like this, except without the coat. And I'm just sitting in this gym, a wild card gym in Hollywood. And I'm there like 25 minutes and no one's saying anything. And I'm just observing, taking mental notes, which actually served as my lead for the article I wrote. But then Michael Moore, I think he's about 6'5", 6. He's a tall guy, former heavyweight champion. Side note: he was the boxer knocked out by George Foreman when George Foreman in the 90s had become the oldest heavyweight champion. He sees me and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm with Fox Sports. I'm just like looking. You can't come in yet. Availability is not till I think it was like noon or 1 o'clock. So I have to go." He said, "You have to leave." I said, "I'm not doing anything. You have to go now." So now I'm like sitting in my little Honda Civic for like another hour waiting for availability.
So
But
I thought you were like physically thrown out. You're just told to leave then.
oh, I'm not messing with anybody who's
No.
a former heavyweight champion. Like if he told me like to go jump in the lake, I'm going to jump in the lake because I'm not. This is all I've got, and it's not much, but it's mine. And yeah, no. Somebody else I might have said something to, but as a big guy like that,
Yeah.
no way.
All right. So how did you get into was sports? What was the draw? Was it sports? Was it writing?
It was somewhat of a happy accident, though that I've always been interested in sports. Ever since I can remember, always fascinated by sports. Growing up outside Philadelphia, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, just bigger than life personalities. Charles Barkley, who a lot of people see on NBA on TNT, still is a big personality. So this is whom you're watching. Buddy Ryan and the Philadelphia Eagles. And so always loved sports, always loved journalism. One of the things that I remember as a kid is my parents always got the Philadelphia Inquirer delivered to the house. And the local news was always on. If we ate dinner at 6 o'clock, we had to eat dinner as a family. 6 and 6:30, news was on. So it was either Jim Gardner or it was Yuki Washington. Anyway, the local news was on. And then ABC World News with Peter Jennings was going to be on. So this is what we were watching. So always, Action News. That jingle is still going. I think it's like 45 years later, the same jingle. And so always loved news. And my school had like a little tour of the local news of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think somewhere at home, I think I had like, I still have a picture of myself maybe at like 6 or 7 years old with like the only black guy I could find at the Inquirer at that time. It's just like in my newsroom. But I was talking to somebody else. Uh, oh, goodness. Anyway, growing up in the market like Philadelphia, you could see a lot of people of color who were in the news as well. So this was important that you could see people like you who were doing the news. Even though I really didn't want to work on television, this is who I saw. Yep, Yuki. Mm-hmm. We saw Yuki once at Reading Terminal, just like we were in Philly for some tour of like the Liberty Bell, and so
people are people are enjoying the connections in the group chat. So if you have the group chat turned off, you'll be confused as to these reactions. But the group chat in that word chat is, sometimes almost as interesting as, I wouldn't say as interesting, because then I'd be out of a job, but almost as interesting as what goes on in here. So.
And so I'll fast forward the story. So I got opportunities through my high school and some people I know to write for my local paper, internships thanks to the Dow Jones News Fund. The late Rich Holden was a big influence in my career. When I interned in the New York Times, Meryl Perlman, she's in the chat, helped watch out for me. So a lot of great mentors and a lot of people that help open doors. A lot of folks at Gannett. That's where I started my career. So I started in news in Delaware. And then after a month, I went to sports. Mm-hmm. And then at first I thought in trouble. They're like, no, you're fine. Then after about like 2 months, I went back to news. And so then I kind of floated back and forth because I had experience working in news and sports and in internships and in college at our college paper. And often what happens in journalism, my old boss went to the Baltimore Sun, and I followed along. He was the sports editor, so followed along. And then as what happens in the industry, especially in 2008, the economic instability, I was like, well, I don't know how long I'll be able to stay in Baltimore. And I was able to find a gig at Fox Sports, and I was able to transition there to go from newspapers to an all digital platform, and worked there for almost 3 years before then I went into academia.
Mm-hmm. So you, what will be your life story. What was that transition, and what drove you to say, like, I want to get a PhD?
I mean, I had, and I think this is huge, especially as we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we talk about bringing in different voices. You need a lot of folks who invest in you and want to help you. And so my alma mater, a lot of folks really believed in me and saw my career flourish. And they said, we would love for you to potentially come back one day. And I had gone through at Fox, and my last year there, I'd become the deputy NFL editor for the website. That was a lot of work. And we had the Super Bowl on the TV that year. So that was a great experience to work on that from the website team. A lot of great folks there, but it's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and you start coming out of it and you're like, man, that's how long can I do this? How many years do I see myself doing this? And what is the toll that I'm putting on myself? And I was like, well, is this door still open? And Penn State's like, yep, this door is still open. Apply. And I think in 2006, I think I had still taken my GRE, so that score was still good. And so I had all of my stuff and I was able to transition. But my time interning in different places and people who had helped talk to me and develop me and put up with my foolishness along the way, that got me very much interested in gender issues. Being a black person in journalism, okay, I figured I was going to do something with race, but my experiences in sports, I'm like, okay, why do I think the way I do? Why did this come out of my mouth at this time? Why did all these things happen? And taking coursework and looking at research, oh, it's this and oh, it's that. And you're kind of unlearning a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where like you want to have that diversity where people can tell you something perhaps in the working environment, but then as you grow and mature, you can see why that was wrong. You can
Mm-hmm.
see why that you need to change yourself. And so um, that has really helped me along the way to kind of see like my privilege as a man in sports or as a man in the newsroom at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is a key line. And I've been talking to one of my co-authors about it because I can't remember the exact author. But if we take nothing away from this chat, this quote has stuck with me for about the past 7, 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I can't ask someone to see how I'm oppressed until I acknowledge all the ways I oppress people. And so I have to look at my privilege in religion or look at my privilege in sexual orientation or in education, socioeconomic status, in gender.
Mm-hmm.
If I can acknowledge all of the ways I have privilege, then I've opened myself up to helping those who are marginalized in those spaces. So then when I'm asking for allyship, that's an authentic allyship because I've already tried to humble myself to acknowledge that. And I think a lot of people need to look at privilege in this. It's not 100% absolute, right? There are different points where this identity is a privilege, and then at times another part of your identity will be marginalized. But it's looking at how can I be inclusive in all ways. And then when you're asking for people to make that investment back, they know you're authentic because you're always looking to try to widen that circle and keep learning more.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We're running out of time.
I'm sorry
And
for talking so much,
no,
Mark.
no,
I
no.
apologize.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point of you being here. And we're not running out of time in a bad way. It's just that I had, I sent you a bunch of things I wanted to talk about, and we have not solved the question of whether to capitalize white, which is, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and I've written about it, and I can see there's a lot of good reasons, and now's a great time to say, let's as a race, let's uppercase black. With white, um, I've been going back and forth, and it's very difficult because there are so many good reasons on the other side. I think I'm finally, just before AP decided that they were continuing to lowercase white, um, I I reached the point where I was able to say, no, I don't agree with that. I think if you're going to capitalize black, you should capitalize white, and there's so many different arguments, so many different reasons. But one is that it sort of leaving white lowercase, it leaves that as a default, and also uppercasing black makes it seem like there's one black, but there's many different whites. So white can be somebody from Italy, somebody uh, from Northern Europe. Uh, there's this whole diversity of whiteness, but in black, suddenly if we're capitalizing it, almost feels like there's just one black, and there's Caribbean black, there's African black, there's Southern black, there's urban black. You know, there's so many different cultures
Yeah.
within that. So in 20
Have you
words or
read my
less,
upcoming book chapter on that?
did I read it? No, is that what you say in your upcoming book
Yeah,
chapter?
I have a book. I have a book chapter that's I have to make I have to make the revisions. That's due Friday.
Oh, excellent.
I have on like so it's not it's on this usage of white community versus black community,
Hmm.
and we don't see the term white community because um, I'll make this very brief. As most of the leaders in let's say Western linguistic English are white, and especially white men, they they are part of the in group, so they can see diversity within their own group. When you get into an out group, so people who are not like you tend to flatten out differences and see you see that group as monolithic. So when it's like there's a black community, well, if people have been to Baton Rouge, that's the black people in Baton Rouge are very different than the black people in Queens or the black people in LA. And yep, I agree in the chat. Like when we're looking at community, it's not as if like I got an email when I moved to Baton Rouge, all the black people are coming to Florida Avenue and we're going to go and talk about things. And why do we not say black people or a segment of black people? This also, and I'm running over time, but I think it's important. We don't use terms like men's issues in politics, but we'll say something is a woman's issue.
Hmm.
I have a 3-month-old. Childcare is my issue too. Um, Domestic violence, that's an issue for all of society, right? And why are we limiting certain issues to some marginalized groups, but then other issues or other terms are universal
Right.
when a lot of our problems are um, they are societal problems in general. But I can go on about that on another day. But I wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and I uh, appreciate that. I apologize for questions we didn't get to. You know, there's a good excuse to have you back. We can because this is an ongoing thing, and maybe 6 months or a year we'll have you back, and we can talk about where we are and get to some questions that we didn't get to. Um, we didn't deal with brown. With black, is it something? Do you think it's problematic to uppercase black because of that reason?
I don't think it's problematic. I think and Meredith Clark at University of Virginia, she wrote a great piece for Pointer in 2015 about it. You're capitalizing it highlights the political identity of race because race is often very political when you come to black people were 3/5 of a person,
Mm.
right? And black people didn't have specific rights. And so when you're trying to bring that attention forward, my feeling is capitalizing the W in white is also because white signifies a political identity too that often is rendered invisible because it's considered, as you said, Mark, the norm. And so if you're highlighting, oh, it's a political identity, so what do all the rights mean? I mean, rights as in like economic rights, land rights, the ability to navigate different spaces historically, that's all been afforded to being white. If we had more time, we'd talk about how white as an identity changes over time too. Irish immigrants did not come into the US
Right.
and were afforded white status. That was conferred later. And this is something when we talk about race, it's so complicated and it's fraught with a lot of fault lines, but a lot of history. And we tend to kind of erase the history part and kind of talk about things as they are now without understanding how things have evolved into how it manifests today.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you very much. This has been really informative, really great. It's wonderful to get to know you. Congratulations on your first child, right?
Yep, thank
Yeah,
you.
the 3 month old.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
baby Samuel.
Samuel, wonderful name. All right, well, thank you all for being here, and Steve will, I'm sure, be has a book chapter coming out. He'll be doing other things like this. I shouldn't speak for you, but send him an email. Hit him up on Twitter if you have questions that we didn't get to. But thanks very much. A couple of weeks we've got Ben Zimmer here, so that'll be fun. Talking about all sorts of word related things. So uh, thank you very much, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Take care, everyone.